Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me in the back if I talk like this? Okay, good. Let me ask, how many of you have been to one of these science cafes before? Okay, maybe about half the people. Interesting. All right, well, this is my first one, too. So I'm going to be talking about some very general topics in the science of complexity. How many people here have heard of the Santa Fe Institute? A lot of people, except some of the kids, know. So some of you might know that up on the hill, there's an institute that is devoted to studying complex systems, and it's world-renowned. It's the most famous institute in the world for the study of complex systems, and it's right here in Santa Fe. So you guys should feel very lucky to have that here. Let me see if I can get my clicker to work. I don't know if it's going to work this far away. You see, its batteries are dead.
Maybe blocked by the...
Oh, it's not working.
It's not working?
Yeah. I wonder if, can I ask somebody to change the slides?
What's this? Is this
That's a mouse, but you can just see the arrows. Okay, so you go to the first slide, please. The great and late physicist Heinz Pagels said that science has explored the microcosmos and the macrocosmos. That means the very, very small, like quantum mechanics, and the very, very large, like galaxies and cosmology. And we have a good sense of the lay of the land, but the great unexplored frontier is complexity. So what do I mean by complexity? Here are some examples of what people call complex systems. Brains, in which we have trillions of cells called neurons that are all connected and sending electrical and chemical impulses to each other. Out of this big array of neurons somehow arises what we might call intelligence or cognition and emotions. But nobody understands how those things come about from just the little neurons talking to each other in the brain. Another example of a complex system is an insect colony. Does anyone know what this is? Can anyone tell what it is? It's a bridge made of ant bodies. The ants have, without any leader or central controller, managed to connect up their bodies so that the ants can cross from one tree to another without having to go all the way down to the ground and over to the tree. They've found a shortcut by forming a bridge. And it's not totally clear how they figure out how to do that on their own. So that's an example. Yeah. The immune system. This is another system inside your body that's keeping you from getting sick. It's working all the time, and it consists of trillions of cells, like the brain, without any leader or any central control, that the cells are like little soldiers moving around in the body trying to find germs, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and defeat them. And they work collectively without any central leader. Another example that people in complex systems study, very, very different, is financial markets. So here we have individuals, people. This is an old picture, as you may tell, of the New York Stock Exchange from very early on. And they used to have these little pieces of paper that they would wave in the air and say, buy or sell. Now it's all done by computer. But back in those days, these people were all communicating with each other, working independently with no central leader. And out of this, you got all the behavior of the stock market. Okay. Another example, the World Wide Web. So you've seen in each of these examples so far, we have the individuals, like the neurons in the brain, the ants in an ant colony, the people, buyers and sellers in the stock market. Now we have web pages. The web pages are connected to each other by hyperlinks, and there's no boss of the World Wide Web, as you probably know. There's no leader. People just link their pages to other pages, and out of this comes some very interesting and useful structure that no one organized. It organized itself. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Social networks. Probably all of you are familiar with Facebook. I don't know, how many of you have account on Facebook? How many people? Wow. I'm surprised that it's not everybody. Well, anyway, this is a map of links between Facebook friends. And it turns out that social networks like Facebook's are themselves complex systems that people in this field study. They study how information gets propagated along links in social networks and how the networks change over time. So here's the central question that people in complex systems try to study. How is it that these kinds of large systems, like the ones we've looked at, in which the components are relatively simple compared to the system as a whole, and they have limited communication, and there's no leader or boss, how is it that they organize themselves? How is it that they are adaptive? They're able to learn from their environment and do better and survive. How is it that that happens? And this is the topic of this talk. It's a very broad area, so I'm going to be giving you a few examples of how this happens. Thank you. Okay, so some people have summed up this idea by the phrase, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So if we look at these systems, like the ant colony, for example, we can try and understand each individual ant, but if we just understand the ants themselves, we don't understand how the whole structures that they create come to be. So this is the kind of thing that people are interested in this field, where we can't just understand a system by looking at its components. We have to look at their interactions, and it's more than the sum. Okay, so today's talk, I'm going to give some examples of self-organization. If I have time, 4 examples. You can keep clicking. I'm going to talk about birds flocking and fish schooling, fireflies that synchronize their flashes, ants foraging for food, and social networks structuring themselves. And you'll see that these things, even though they're very different kinds of phenomenon, they have a lot in common. Okay, so the first is the birds flocking and fish schooling. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a very short movie. Okay, and I have to click on it. So you've probably all seen flocking birds and how they're able to, even though there's large numbers of them, they're able to move almost like a unified organism and able to like turn really fast all together, merge. And it's really quite amazing. And this is a picture, a movie of fish schooling, which is a very similar phenomenon, where you get these individual fish that are very closely following one another, making these circles, and being able to do very much like flocking. So the question I want to ask is, first, why do they do it? And then how do they do it? So let me ask, especially for the younger people in the audience, why do birds flock and fish school? Why do they do that? Does anybody know? Yeah.
For safety numbers, kind of for their own protection.
Very good. So
Say the answer, please.
for safety in numbers, for their own protection. Because when you have a bunch of, for instance, fish schooling, they're harder to be prey. They look bigger, for one thing, and it's harder for a predator to pick one out when they're all doing this thing together. So any other reason to do it? Well, let me give some examples. If you could just click a few of these. Yeah. Okay, so there's actually several hypotheses. That's one of them. So one is that, as you said, predators will think that the flock or the school is a single, larger, threatening organism and won't try to attack it. Also, and predators won't be able to target individuals in the flock. But also, turning things around, the flock or school will be more efficient at catching prey via cooperative hunting, for example, than individuals alone. Also, the flock or school increases the individual's aero or hydrodynamic efficiency. Who knows what a peloton is in bicycling? You guys seen bicycle races where all the bicycles are in one closest group? And the reason for that is because that allows the air resistance for the riders in the middle to be lessened so they can go faster. And so, for instance, you always see, like when Lance Armstrong, for example, was racing in the Tour de France, he would always have his team doing this peloton so he could go faster. And it seems that that idea actually came from this whole idea of birds flocking and fish schooling to make their efficiency better. Okay, so there's many hypotheses for why this happens, and possibly all are correct. Now the question is, okay, wait a second. How do they do it? So one thing that's known is that fish schools have no leader, no fish that's telling all the other fish what to do, and bird flocks have no leader. You guys have probably seen marching bands where the bands are all marching and making formations and patterns, and they all have a little card that tells them what to do. But the fish don't have a card, the birds don't have a card. How do they do it? Anyone know?
Look at the nearest neighbor.
They look at their nearest neighbor and do what the nearest neighbor does? Okay, so you can go now. Okay, well, this guy, Craig Reynolds, was one of the people who proposed a solution to this problem. He was actually a computer graphics designer who was interested in getting realistic flocks of birds into computer animation. And so he created this model called Boids. And here was the rules of how his model worked. His model was a computer model that had simulated birds. And each bird followed some simple rules. Each bird avoided collisions. That was the most important thing. Attempted to match its speed with nearby neighbors, as you say, and attempted to stay close to nearby neighbors, flock mates. Okay, so if you go on, and I'll show you a little movie. This is an example of the Boyd simulation. This is actually fish schooling, but it's the same kind of thing. So this is a model, computer animation, that each one of these little simulated fish uses those rules and does quite a nice, convincing job of schooling, even though each one is incredibly simple and nobody's leading the whole school. So that's a nice example. And I'm going to show you a model, a computer model of flocking using NetLogo. Is it okay if I stand here? Okay. So let me tell you, NetLogo is a computer language that was designed for people to learn about complex systems by creating them in a computer simulation. How many people here have used NetLogo? I know some of you have. Yeah, probably some of you have been in the GUTS program. Yeah, you've used it? Cool. Okay, great. So you'll be familiar with this. And here's what the model does. Each bird says if I'm too close to the nearest neighbor, I'm going to separate. Otherwise, I'm going to align, which means I'm going to turn so I'm headed in the same direction as the average of my neighbors. And cohere, which means move closer to my nearest neighbors. So let me get out of this and get into the model. Okay, so here we have flocking. Okay, NetLogo looks like this. It has a bunch of variables or values that you can set. And the ones that you need to know about are the population, which is the number of birds, and their vision, which is how far away they can see in terms of their neighbors. So if I do setup, here's some simulated birds, and each one can see about 3 squares away, where the square is about the size of the bird. Okay, and if we do go, I can speed it up. And they start out moving at random, and they are just following those simple rules And by following those simple rules, they create very coherent flocks. Okay. So if I go back to this, I showed you the flocking model. I'm going to ask a question. If I increase, and this is one of the things you can do with these models, is you can play with them and sort of test your intuition. If I increase the vision range, that is how far away each bird can see so that it can help sort of do what its neighbors are doing, will the flocking behavior become stronger, that is, converging more quickly on flocks, or weaker, converging more slowly with smaller flocks? What do you think?
B.
You think it's B? It's going to get weaker as you increase how far away a bird can see? Yeah?
I think A, because they can see more birds around them, causing them to group into larger flocks.
Okay, so we have a vote for A and a vote for B. This always makes things interesting. How many people say A? How many people say B? Oh boy. Well, here's what you do. You try it out. So this is the great thing about NetLogo. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make the vision bigger. So let's make it 5 patches. We do setup and go. And so we'll see if it's stronger or weaker. What do you think? Okay. And we can try that even more. Oops. I can try that even more with like 7 patches and see if it's even better. And yeah, they converge on a flock better. And if we go all the way down to like 1 patch, we'll see what happens. And then it's hard for them to converge on a flock at all. Okay, so don't feel bad if you got it wrong, because these complex systems are hard to predict. That's what makes them interesting. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you, if you haven't ever used NetLogo, it's really fantastic. It's free. It's easy to use and learn. And you can download it by going to this website. So if you want to, you could also just go to Google and search NetLogo, and you'll find it. Okay, so now let me talk a little bit about a different phenomenon, fireflies synchronizing their flashes. Okay, so we have a movie. If you could just click on the movie, click on the thing, just click. So what you're going to see is a bunch of fireflies flashing at random, and then they're going to start to synchronize, which means all flash at the same time. And so this is sort of like the situation with the birds, in that there's no leader telling them all when to flash. Each one is flashing independently, but it's looking at neighboring fireflies and trying to figure out when to flash. Okay, and so this is a really striking phenomenon that maybe some of you have seen. Okay, next. Here's the same question. Why should the fireflies synchronize their flashing? Does anybody know? Yeah.
Well, we're above the fireflies. In certain places, they go in termite holes and they do synchronized flashing, which attracts termites, which they eat.
Oh, I sure didn't know that. He said that they eat termites, and the synchronized flashing attracts termites. That's really interesting. Yeah, that wasn't the reason I was thinking, but that could be a good reason. Yeah.
Maybe so they can find each other?
That's a very good reason, so they can find each other. Okay, so there's multiple hypotheses. Well, it turns out that it's the males who are synchronizing their flashing. They're trying to find females to mate with, and this makes their location more visible since they're all in the dark at night. Okay? It also makes small groups of males larger, which some researchers think make them more attractive to females. So the different groups of males are competing for the females. It also reduces noise, which means that, you know, if everybody was flashing at different times, it would be hard for the males to find females. So a hypothesis is that males can more easily spot females in the dark. So maybe all of these are correct plus more, as has been pointed out. So the next obvious question is, how do they synchronize? Yeah?
If they flash the same distance between each flash, they can look at their neighbors, see when they flash, predict when they next will flash, then flash at that same time, synchronizing.
Right. That's the right idea. So we're going to assume that there's no leader, there's no firefly in charge. Each individual firefly only sees its neighbor's flashes. So now I'm going to define a term. Each firefly is a natural oscillator. Oscillator means that it's turning on and off after a certain amount of time. And the frequency, how often it turns on and off, is about every 1 second. So here's an example of that. Here's a firefly flashing, 1 second, flash again, 1 second, flash again, 1 second, flash again. Okay? And here's, but if there's another firefly, it might have a different clock for flashing. So you get different fireflies flashing at different times. So so we want them to synchronize. So if you go to the next one, what seems to be happening is in the brain of the firefly, the way that it's figuring out how to flash is that some kind of excitation, some kind of electrical stimulus builds up in its neurons. And when that reaches a threshold, it means it gets above a certain amount, the firefly flashes and that resets its clock. So if you go to the next one. But if it sees a flash from a neighbor, it speeds up its cycle and it flashes sooner. So we have interacting group gives us this kind of synchrony. And these things are called coupled oscillators. So there's a good science term for you that just means that they're oscillating, turning on and off, and they're coupled, meaning that they interact with each other. So hold on 1 second. There was some slide that I was missing somewhere. My slides with the clocks. Oh, yeah. OK, sorry. Yeah, good. OK, so we're going to show you another NetLogo model of fireflies flashing. And each firefly is going to cycle through its own clock, flashing at the beginning of the cycle and then resetting the clock to 0 once it reaches the maximum. So let's just see how that works. So here's the clock. Think of this as the firefly's brain. And keep going. It turns on at 0, and then it goes, and it goes, and it goes. It waits for, say, a certain number of clicks of its clock, and then it flashes again. Okay? And it keeps doing that over and over again. And all fireflies have the same cycle length, but they start at a different point in their cycle. So they're out of sync. So here's one with its clock at 0. Here's one with its clock at 3. One with its clock at 9, maybe. Okay? But as they perceive the other fireflies near them, within a radius of 1 patch in this NetLogo model, just really close, they use that information to reset their own clock to 0. So let me show you that model. OK. OK, let's see, fireflies. Right, so here's the fireflies model. And I'm not going to show you all the things that it does. Its cycle length is 10, like I showed you. And we're going to start out with 1,500 fireflies. OK? So you see the yellow ones are flashing and the gray ones are not flashing. So actually, let me start out just with one firefly to show you how this works. So I set it up, and I go. And it's going to flash every 10 time steps. And I don't know, you can't really see it. It's too fast. There you go. You can see it flashing. And it's moving around at random. So the fireflies all move around at random. So let's move this up. Oh, we'll move it up to 1200 or so. Set up and go. So now they're all moving around at random. Some of them are flashing. And when one of them sees somebody next to it flash, it resets its clock to be in sync. So they're gradually getting in sync. This is the number, this plot is the number that are flashing at each time step. So you can see they're still all flashing at different time steps, but they're all starting to flash in synchrony. And you see it very quickly, they jump up to this completely synchronized flashing, where everybody's flashing at the same time. So these very simple rules give rise to this really interesting coordinated behavior. Okay, so here's my experiment now to ask. As you increase the number of fireflies, will the synchronization be faster or slower? Okay, let's ask, did you have a guess? Yeah?
Faster.
Faster. One guess for faster. Yeah.
Slower.
Slower, okay. That's more fireflies. Yeah?
Slower because they have to focus on more of the time to actually start synchronizing.
Okay, so we have some votes for faster, some votes for slower. How many people think faster? How many people think slower? Okay, so let's do our experiment. Okay, so we go back to our fireflies. So I'm going to increase the population. I think I had it at 1,200. Wait, what did I have it at?
1202.
Oh, this is a flocking. Yeah, let me get rid of that. Where's the fireflies? It's behind this. Okay, right. So let's put it all the way up to 2,000. Okay, and it took, here it took about 996 time steps for the whole thing at 1,200. So let's see how long it takes at 2,000. Okay, it seems to be, this one seems to be synchronizing faster. Interesting. So it looks like A was the right answer. So why, for those of you for somebody who said faster, why do you think it was faster? What was the reason? I think it was you.
Because there are more fireflies and there are more fireflies closer to one another.
There's more fireflies and they're more closer to one another. They're denser. And it turns out that a lot of these phenomena depend a lot on density. That each firefly or bird or whatever is looking around in its neighborhood, and the more it sees around it, the faster it's able to do the organization. The whole system can organize itself. So that seems to be a common principle between these two. Okay, so I have, can I ask you to do it? Yeah. This is one more, okay. So, oh, go back. Okay, how many people have seen this kind of thing in their kitchen? We have our ants foraging for food. This is another example of an interesting self-organizing system. And you've probably seen this kind of thing maybe in your backyard where you get these incredible trails of ants. I've seen, the best ant trails I've seen have been in New Mexico, I have to say. And the big giant ant hills you get here are really fascinating. Okay, if you go on. Here's some ants who have found a little piece of something that somebody dropped on the floor. And you might have noticed that if you drop like just a little crumb on the floor, very quickly there's a huge number of ants that have found it. And you think, oh, well, they all told their friends. One of them found it, and then they all went and told their friends who all came, which is actually totally the truth. And we're going to look at how ants, without any central control, are able to organize their foraging for food, looking for food, so that they're able to do it extremely efficiently. So this is a movie. Okay, so before I start this is an ant experiment. So people study ants in the lab. And in this experiment, ants are given, there's some food over here, and they're given two choices, going this way or going this way. This way's a lot shorter, but the ants can't see that far, so they don't know that. And they move around kind of at random here. So how do they all figure out to take the shortcut? And I'm going to show you. This is sort of after they've had some time to do this. You'll see like a few ants going over on the other side, but the vast majority are going on the shortcut to the food. They're efficiently finding the food. So tell me, how do they do that? Yes? Yes?
When they touch each other, they spread the pheromones, because the ants returning tell the ants that hey, this is faster, don't go that way.
Okay, so what he said was that they touch each other, they spread pheromone, which is a kind of chemical that ants can produce in their bodies. And it helps tell the other ants what to do. Yeah?
And also, another way is, if the first ant goes that way, they leave like a certain scent trail that all the other ants would follow.
That's right. They leave a trail for all the other ants to follow. That's very good. You guys are ant experts here. I'm impressed. Did you have an ant lecture here or something?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
No, but this didn't start at time 0.
No, this did not start at time 0. So what happened was, right, the ants sort of, at the beginning, were sort of going half and half on this little bridge. And the ones that found food over here came back. Some of them came back this way, some of them came back this way. So some of them were spreading pheromone here, some of them were spreading pheromone here. Where pheromone's this chemical that ants are attracted to, that the ants spread. So how come, even though some of them were going this way, some of them were going this way, remember they can't see far enough to know that this is not the shortcut. So how come they all end up over here, since half of them coming back with the food are going this way at the very beginning? Does anybody know that? That's a puzzle. Yeah?
Maybe because it's newer, and so it means that the scent is more recent, so that way they reach the food faster.
That is exactly right. So what he's saying is that what ants are attracted to is a concentration of pheromone, how much pheromone there is. They're more likely to go towards the higher concentration of pheromone. Because this is shorter, there's less time for the pheromone to evaporate. The pheromone evaporates. And this takes longer, so as the ants moving along here, there's more time here for the pheromone to evaporate before other ants get to here. So the pheromone stays longer on this side, and the ants end up being more attracted because there's a higher concentration left there. So they're able to organize themselves to follow the shortest trail. So you can go on. So we're going to talk about, what happens out in your backyard or wherever, ants start out moving randomly in many different directions. And when it encounters a food source, it returns to the nest, leaving this pheromone trail, and are likely to follow it, especially if it's high concentration. And the ants also leave pheromone, so pheromone is continually being left on the trails that the ants are following. But it continually evaporates, so the trail disappears if it's not reinforced by the ants. So we're going to look at one more, I'm not sure how much time I'm going to have, but we'll look at least one more model of in NetLogo. So here we're going to see each ant leaving the nest and moving around at random, finding a piece of food, picking it up, carrying it back to the nest, and sensing pheromone, going to the highest concentration. Thank you. Okay. So let me show you the ants model, and then I'll give you a little exercise. So ants. Okay, so here we have, I'm going to do setup. This is our ant nest. This is a pile of food. This is a pile of food. This is a pile of food. So here we have the evaporation rate at 2, whatever that means. It's going to evaporate at a certain rate. It's going to diffuse, which means it's going to spread out. And let's just go. So you see ants crawling out, collecting food. They take pieces of food and take it back to the nest. And you can see them following these trails. And the trails evaporate slowly. And they're going to be out of food. See, they're out of food over here, so the trail evaporated. But then those ones found this trail. Okay? So here's a funny story. I'm teaching a class online on complexity. There's a few people here who are in the class, and I gave them this model to play with. And one person wrote to me, I hope it's none of you, saying, can't you show something other than ants? I don't like to see ants crawling around on my computer screen. So you get some interesting comments. So I have a question for you. Now, suppose that I turn off the ant's ability to leave pheromone and they just move around at random. How much faster will they find the food, eat it all up, if they are allowed to leave pheromone than if they're not? So this is a guess. Will it be the same speed? So if I just, they no longer can follow each other's trails. Saying that they will follow each other's trails versus they won't follow each other's trails. Will the one where they follow the trails be the same speed to eat all the food, twice as fast, or 10 times as fast? Yes.
A.
A, okay. Any other guesses? Yeah?
Between B or C.
Between B or C, okay. You only get choice of B or C.
I like C.
You like C, okay. So the answer is it sort of depends on how I set up these values, but let's just see. Now the way I'm going to, so you saw it here, the ants ate all the food after 735 time steps. The way I'm going to turn off pheromone is by setting the evaporation rate all the way up to 99. So now all the pheromone's going to evaporate before any of the ants can see it. So you'll see what happens. So here they go, and you'll see that they're just randomly moving around. I'll speed it up a little bit. And if they happen to find food, they come back to the nest, but nobody can follow anybody's trails. So it's taking a little longer. So the answer really depends on how much food there is and what various rates, but in this case it takes about twice as long in general. Oh, there's that one last piece of food. They can't get it. Oh no, they're stuck. No, it's going to take, they found it. Whew. All right, so anyway, the pheromone trail really helps them out in efficiently finding food. Okay, I have one more example to show you, and then we're done. This is networks structuring themselves. So what's a network? A network is a collection of what are called nodes. Here the nodes are cities, and links between nodes. Here the links are airline routes. So if you've ever taken an airplane somewhere, you've seen this kind of map. And you know that nodes that have many links coming into them are called hubs. So Houston is a hub for this airline. I forgot which airline this is. New York is a hub, and so on. And you know that for flights out of Albuquerque, often Denver is a hub. And if there's a snowstorm in Denver, things get really bad in Albuquerque and all over the place. So if a hub is sort of shut down, then the whole thing kind of collapses. So that's a kind of network. Here's another kind of network. I showed this at the beginning, the World Wide Web. Here the nodes are web pages, and the links are hyperlinks. Okay, next, the Facebook one. Here the nodes are people, and the links are friendship links. Okay, this is another kind of network. This is there's a kind of worm called C. elegans, a little tiny worm that has a brain that only has about 350 neurons in it. And scientists have mapped out every neuron. And each neuron here is a circle. And neurons are connected to other neurons via synapses, which are just connections in the brain. And the size of the node is dependent on how many synapses go into it. And you can see that there's some hubs in the brain, too, just like Houston. So this is the Houston of the brain. And you can get in trouble in the brain if you have these hubs get destroyed. Metabolic, let's skip the metabolic network. Genetic regulatory network, that's a network that's inside your cells. Let's keep going. Here's a food web. I think some of you probably heard Jennifer Dunn talk about food webs. This, in here, each node is a kind of species of animal, and each node is linked to other nodes if one of them eats the other one. That's what a food web is. And you see this kind of hub structure. Here's somebody that eats a lot of other organisms, or other organisms eat. And so people look at the food chain. If this was a particular species of fish that went extinct, a lot of other species would go extinct too, because they depend on it. So people look at things like that in food webs.
Where are people in that web?
Sorry? Where are people in that? This is a marine food web, so they're not in this one. Yeah. Okay, so let me just say that there's something interesting about that structure I just showed you. Here's another picture of part of the World Wide Web where we have these hubs. If I just threw down a bunch of nodes and connected them up at random, this is what the graph would look like. It doesn't look at all like this. There are no hubs. And so all these networks that we've seen have a very different structure than this random network. Okay, so, and one of the things we can do is, this is a plot where I plot the number for each node. If it has one link into it, it gets plotted here. If it has more than one, here's the number of nodes that have this many inlinks. So here, most of the nodes have about the same number of links that coming into them. Whereas here, there's a whole lot of nodes that have very few links coming to them, like my web page doesn't have very many people who have linked to it, and very few that have a lot of links coming into them, like a lot of people link to Google, for example, or the New York Times or something. And those are sort of the hubs of the World Wide Web. And so this is the kind of structure. And so why is it that networks in nature structure themselves that way? There's nobody in charge of the World Wide Web that designed that structure. There's nobody in charge of the brain that designed that structure. They happen to organize into those structures. So, well, I was going to ask you, but I'll just tell you. One hypothesis is that a new node in any of these systems coming in is likely to connect to nodes that already have many connections. So if you have a new web page, you're more likely to put in a hyperlink to a web page that already has a lot of connections than one that doesn't. And that's also known as the rich get richer. That is, if you have a lot of friends, if I want to make friends, I generally make friends with somebody who already has a lot of friends than somebody who doesn't have friends. So the more popular get more popular. In the brain, neurons tend to link often to synapses to other neurons that have many synapses already coming into them. A technical term for this that people use is called preferential attachment. And let me just show you one more model before I finish, which is the NetLogo preferential attachment model, which says at each time step, a new node is created, and it randomly chooses one existing node to link to with a bias. That is, the more links an existing node has, the more likely it is to be chosen. Let me just show you that. So preferential attachment, I do setup. It creates two nodes that are linked to each other. Okay, and now if I go once, it has another link that chose which of the two to link to. Here's my two original. Here's the new one. I go once again. I go once again. So every time I'm adding a new node, and if I just do this over and over again, you'll start to see the non-random structure emerging just out of this very simple rule. That is, you have a preference to link to nodes that already have a lot of links. And you start to get networks that are very much like those networks, those natural networks I showed you. So something to take away from this is that these very simple models can help us give insight into how these complex systems are behaving and why they can help us test these hypotheses. Okay, so let me just ask, is there any benefit for a network to have this structure? Anyone know why the airlines chose to have this structure?
Efficiency.
It's more efficient. It's cost effective for them. It's more efficient for getting people from place A to place B than just having a whole bunch of random connections. And that seems to be true, not just in this airline network, which was designed by engineers, but also in brain networks that were designed by evolution, or the World Wide Web that was self-organized. So this whole idea of how networks get formed is a really interesting new area of complex system science. Okay, so that's the end of my talk, and if you want to learn more, here's an advertisement for my book that goes into this and more. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Melanie, that was splendid. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We have time for some questions. While we're doing questions, maybe you could fill out your form. And then I'm going to use my calculator here to pick a random number, and we're going to pick the one who wins. The only rule is that if an adult wins, you have to pledge to take a young person with you. If the young person wins, that's great. So let's take a few questions, and then we'll see how we do. Yes.
Do you have a way of showing, like, in a financial market, if you had, let's say, a free market, and you place a regulator into it, do you have a way of showing how it affects?
So the question is, if we're modeling a financial market that's a free market and we want to see the effect of regulation, can we do that? And that's exactly what a lot of economists do. There's a new area of economics that's actually called complexity economics that involves this kind of modeling, trying to model very large-scale economies and look at the effects of regulation and other kinds of economic policies. So there's an institute that was founded by George Soros, you probably know of, called the Institute for New Economic Thinking, that's at Oxford University, that's dedicated to this very kind of question. So yes. Yes?
How similar, you showed the C. elegans brain, the neuron map of the brain. How similar are the worms from worm to worm?
I don't know for sure, but I think they're very similar. You know, they have, the structure of the brain is genetic, well, it's not completely deterministic, but it's largely determined by genes, and so their genetic makeup's very similar, so their brain structure's very similar. Same with humans. But, you know, it's those small differences that some small differences can have large consequences, so we have very different kinds of brains and personalities. But they're similar enough so that we can presumably communicate with each other sometimes. Yeah?
Can you give me an idea of how many rules you can have before it stops self-organizing?
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like in your ant model, we have 2 simple rules.
Mm-hmm.
If I had 8 rules, would then it no longer give us pattern?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think it depends what the rules are. Because I can have a very small number of rules that give no pattern, and a very large number of rules that do give pattern, but it's a matter of what specific rules there are. Yeah.
I have an offshoot of that question.
Okay.
How does your model change when you have a hive of bees and there's a queen bee?
How does it change?
Yeah, I mean,
Well-
there is a central organizer.
Well, I think that's not true. The queen bee is not, the queen bee spends all of her time having baby bees or laying eggs. That's all she does. She doesn't organize anybody.
They don't wait for some cue from her.
No, no. Yeah.
Is it possible to have a pattern that's just totally random?
Yes. Is it possible to have a pattern that's totally random? Yes. And for instance, maybe you could see with the ants where I had no pheromone. That was just completely, the ants were just moving around at random.
But normally they always have them up there.
They do because they don't want them. It's less efficient to move at random. But you know, random. They have some randomness in that they move around at random and are influenced by pheromone. Because if everybody went along the same pheromone trail, but there was some really great food way over here that nobody found, they'd never find it. So there's always some ants that are kind of randomly moving away from the main trail, and they need to do that. Yeah.
Has complexity been used to try to model the evolution of the universe, of the cosmos, as a whole, you know, galaxies and the distribution of matter in the universe?
So has complexity been used to model the sort of evolution of the universe? So people have modeled that, for sure. I don't know if people would call that a complex system because, well, to some extent, you get organization of planets and things like that. So, you know, yes, so I guess the answer is yes, people have looked at that kind of model. I'm not that familiar with that area.
Not as clear as your examples.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, the universe can be explained by quantum mechanics and also Einstein's relativity theory. And relativity theory is, you know, for larger systems like planets, and quantum mechanics is for subatomic particles.
Right.
And basically, you know, what quantum mechanics says is that every single possibility is there.
Mm-hmm.
Every single possibility, every single position, every single angle. So, from a mathematical standpoint, it is considered a complex system, but
It can be.
with mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Because every test that they've done mathematically.
Right, people in complex systems often don't really typically look at quantum mechanics. They're more interested, at least the people that I know of who are working in this field are more interested in larger scale phenomenon.
Einstein's relativity.
Right.
And
So,
we just don't know what the formula is that joins the two, because they really
yeah,
are the same thing.
they make different predictions. That's right. Let's see. Yes.
Using complexity, is it theoretically possible to predict almost any outcome, like everything?
No, in fact, a lot of things are inherently not predictable. There's a phenomenon that I didn't talk about tonight called chaos, which sometimes occurs in complex systems, which basically means that the system is not predictable. For instance, the weather might actually be inherently non-predictable after a week. You know, people haven't had success at predicting it very much more than a week in advance, and nobody knows whether it's more predictable or not, but there are such systems.
Is
Yeah.
it because there are so many variables that it just becomes like just far too much to keep handled?
Well, it also depends on the interactions between the variables.
Yeah.
Even if you have a very small number of variables, if they have certain kinds of interactions, you can still get this kind of chaos and non-predictability. So that's a very good question. And I don't think anybody has the answer for actual systems, real systems.
I think we have time for one more.
Okay, yeah.
Has complexity theory been used to describe or try to understand the use of cell phones and posting and tweeting among like dense urban youth populations?
It has.
To make friends or assemble mobs or
Absolutely.
unit mobs?
Yeah, so that's all part of sort of the social networking. That's a very big area of this sub-area of complexity called network science. And people are really interested in understanding how all that happens and trying to develop theories for it.
anybody who has a question that just can't wait.
Yes, in the back.
Complex data modeling, is there a way of calculating your error rate? For example, in economic modeling, and you're assuming that people follow different rules, you go to one based on that, but people don't always follow the rules, so how do you compensate?
Right. So if you build a model, you want to compare it with real data. So if you're building a model of the economy, you want to compare it with real data and see how well it matches it. And so there's methods for trying to define sort of how wrong your model is. And all models are wrong in some way, but some of them are less wrong than other models. So figuring out how to judge the error of a model is an important part of all this, and gets into very complex kinds of statistics that are quite difficult to understand often. Okay.
Okay, Melanie, thank you.
Thank you.
very much.